I appreciate you joining me for another Todd Talk, where we take teaching theory and turn it into teaching practice. What I want to talk about today is the idea of going above grade level in order to challenge students. So when we are differentiating up, what we're doing is students show mastery of what you're trying to teach them and the level that you're trying to teach them, and then we want to take them further. We want to push them further if they're able to handle that. And there are basically two schools of thought on this, one of which is the idea of enrichment. So in this case, you look at the student has mastered the content standard, but can they go deeper into it? Can they do further research? Can they look at other examples or figure out ways to apply it to real life? And so this is expanding their learning by going deeper. The second school of thought is the idea of acceleration. And we do this with our students in various ways. So one way we do this is we may accelerate a student in math. So if a student is very skilled at math and they're already able to handle fifth grade math, then they may be moved up to a sixth grade math class. And that way they're in a place where they're able to handle those particular content standards. We do it in other subject areas as well. We may single subject accelerate a student. If they're really strong at reading, then we may move them from one grade to the next grade. Sometimes we just skip grades, and students are accelerated whole grade, and that way they're being exposed to content standards that are going to challenge them because they have already showed a propensity for handling the content standards at grade level. Now, it doesn't have to be this extreme. Within your own classroom, you can offer opportunities for students to go above grade level in order to challenge them. And the reason being is that the NAEP determined that between 20 to 40% of students are above grade level already. And so the question is, if 20 to 40% of our class already has a good understanding of this, then what are we doing to take them further? And of course, one of those answers is to then expose them to above grade level content standards so that they will be challenged. Because as each content standard goes to the next grade, typically it's adding layers of complexity, it's adding more depth, it's adding a deeper understanding. And so what you start with, for example, in first grade math, students learn addition. In second grade math, they learn subtraction. In third grade math, they learn multiplication. And in fourth grade math, they learn division. And so each one of these are building upon the other. You can't subtract unless you know how to add. You can't multiply unless you can add and subtract. You can't divide unless you can add, subtract, and multiply. So these are building on each other. But let's say you have a second grader that already has mastered subtraction. They have it really well. Could you introduce multiplication to them? Or if a student shows, that the ability to multiply, the multiplication skill, but it's like the way the content standard is, it's single digit numbers. Could you push it to double or multi-digit numbers when it comes to multiplication, which they'll see in the content standards as they get higher up? The good news is that you don't have to do a lot of the work on this because the content standards, whether you're using the Common Core or your state has particular or specific content standards or learning objectives, but they typically build on each other. So from one grade to the next, it's building up. And so the challenge is already there. And so you don't have to reinvent the wheel in this case. You can just become familiar with the above grade level content standards and then figure out when you can use those in order to challenge students. So let me show you an example of what I mean by this. So these are two sets of content standards. The top one is a math content standard. So in the seventh grade, the content standard is asking that students be able to apply and extend previous understandings of addition and subtraction, which they learned in lower grades, so it's taking them higher, and to be able to subtract rational numbers. So this is all about rational numbers and getting a understanding of what rational numbers and how they represent addition and subtraction on a horizontal or vertical line diagram. So let's say a student is able to do that and they're able to do it with great competency. Then could you take them to that, even though they're a seventh grader, could you introduce this eighth grade content standard that says not only are there irrational numbers, They're numbers that are called irrational numbers. And what can you do with those? What can you learn about those? How can you use those in your math? And so this is just, as a teacher, you'd be sitting there and the kid seems to get the rational numbers fairly quickly and show a mastery of that. And then you could introduce this 8th grade content standard to see how they handle that. Similarly, the bottom 3, this shows how it scaffolds up. So these are reading or literacy content standards for Common Core. And you can see in the 3rd grade, it's asking students to be able to determine the main idea of a text and just to be able to explain it how or to recall details from the book or situations from the book that show this. So it's fairly simple. Students read a book and then they say back to you, this is the main idea, and this is what I heard in the book that made me believe that. It's either blatantly stated or it might be subtly between the lines, but students are pulling out the main idea and explaining it in detail. In the 4th grade, they also have to do this with the main idea, but it's asking them to pull specific textual examples. So how can they not just summarize or explain, but can they take a chunk of text and bring that out as evidence to make their point of the main point? And so they're adding another layer, this 4th grade content standard. The 5th grade content standard is then adding another layer where it's asking not just determine the main idea, but are there additional main ideas? Because books often just don't have a single main idea. There's a couple things going on. They're juggling a few things. So can a student see what the main idea is, and then maybe what some other important ideas are that are going on? So you're asking them to up the amount of main ideas they are identifying. So you can see, so if you have a 3rd grader that shows you the main idea, then you could say to them, well, can you show me textual examples and what you mean by this? And then if they can do that, then you can say, now are there other main ideas that are kind of there as well? And what would those be? And what examples or details or textual examples can you show me to prove that? So one thing that I did in my science class in order to challenge kids above level is I would put above level content standards and not even tell students that that's what I was doing. So what you can see here is when we were covering thermal energy, these are the learning objectives that I laid out for students that I wanted them to be able to master. And the first 2 you notice are just in regular font, where one is to define temperature as a measure of thermal energy. And the next one is to determine then how it can transfer from one object to another by understanding what conduction is. Then the next 2, which are in italics. The one says not only did you understand conduction, but you also should take a look at convection and radiation and how heat is transferred through those as well. Thermal energy is transferred as well. And then when you look at the bottom one, it's trace the transformations of energy from chemical to electrical to mechanical, and then show how, and then recognize that this energy is conserved. These are above grade level content standards. I didn't tell my students this. I indicated it with the italics for myself that these are above grade level because I only held kids accountable to the content standards that they were responsible for learning in the 5th grade. So I would take the first 2 and I would use those to determine mastery. But the other 2 were there if students were able to push themselves to go deeper. And all students attempted these. And some students got a really good understanding of these above grade level content standards, and some did not. But as long as they had the first 2 understood, that was all that I was really responsible for. But I wanted to give my kids the opportunity to push past that, to go above the grade level. And so this is the way I would set up all my science lesson plans, where we had a number of learning objectives, and there was usually 1 to 2, maybe 3 that were also above grade level. I didn't tell students that was the case. I always gave them feedback when they were trying to address these content standards, but I didn't include that as part of their grade because I was responsible for, they were being held accountable for the grade level that they were supposed to be, that they're currently in. So remember that Carol Ann Tomlinson talks about 3 ways that we can differentiate. In this case, we're really focusing on content. The other two are process and product, but we're really looking at content. That's why we're looking at content standards, of taking that content the students are learning and going above grade level. But it doesn't always have to be tied to the standards. You can also take above grade level the content that kids are consuming to learn about these content standards. So, for example, let's say you're in language arts class and you want students to read a book in order to talk about and discuss the theme of self-identity. Well, rather than just saying, here's the one book that everyone is reading, you could offer different books set at different lexile levels that are going to challenge the reading of students above grade level. So, for example, Wonder is right at grade level. It's a 790 lexile level, and students reading it in that class who are on grade level, that would be a good choice. But if you have students that are reading above grade level, then you might want to suggest Catcher in the Rye, which is at 1,000 lexile level. And you could take it even further and suggest that they read Little Women, which is at an 1,190 lexile level. So what you have here is students in a grade level are reading a book about self-identity, but they could choose which one they want, or you can suggest which ones they should read based upon their ability to go above grade level with the content. And you can do that. And one thing that's always a challenge is finding books that do go above grade level, but at the same time don't have content and situations that you don't want to expose these younger kids to. So, for example, John Green writes a lot of really good books that are above content or above the grade level, but I'm not sure I want my sixth grader reading a John Green book because some of the things he has in there are for older kids. So one place that you can turn to are the classics. So you see the example here I gave of Little Women. Little Women has some adult situations, but nothing that's all very tame. It's nothing that's going to scar a child for life or get a parent upset. And so using the classics are a good way to ratchet up or go above grade level when it comes to their reading levels, but at the same time not exposing them to things that you don't want to expose them to. A way you could go above grade level in content when it comes to science class, or is that the articles that they're reading to learn about something. So in other words, you may give them a very kid-friendly article to learn about black holes, but what if you gave them like a one written by a college professor and see if they can handle that? Or if they can't handle that, then what about one that's printed by Scientific American, which is maybe written for a more general audience? Rather than giving them that really kid-friendly one, you allow them to learn about black holes by reading above grade level content. So you could do that in science class. In social studies class, oftentimes the primary documents that we look at can be very confusing, can be above grade level. And so we often find secondary documents that explain them a little bit better, a little more clearly. But what if we gave kids the primary documents and let them try to figure those out and see if they can handle learning about that? So when students are learning about the Constitution, rather than have the textbook explain how the Constitution worked, have the students actually read the Constitution and see if they can't figure that out. So there are ways that you can go above grade level without actually using the content standards, but you're still taking the content that students are going to be learning and taking it above grade level. And so the question may become, the final question I want you to consider is like, how do you determine that a student is ready to go above grade level? So there are many different ways that you could do that. One, when I did my science class, all those students were highly gifted that were in that particular program. And so I felt that they were capable of handling such a thing. You might have a mixed group of students and some that are ready to handle above grade level, and you determine this by just your classroom interactions, or maybe a pre-assessment, or maybe an entrance ticket, or something that gives you evidence that this student is ready to go above what is capable. There are also diagnostic tools such as iReady or MAP or things of that nature, or Study Island, where students can take a diagnostic and then you see where they're at, and then you can challenge them accordingly. But the basic idea of this is that we can take the content that students are supposed to learn and go above grade level in order to challenge them, because the above grade level content is typically more complex, deeper, and requires a little more thinking than maybe the one that's at their grade level.